Welcome to a joyous edition of Man in the Arena. I am Jonah Schultz, and today we are reviewing and reveling in the landslide victory of President Donald Trump, examining what this means for us as a nation and where we are headed from here. But first, a reminder, you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, through social, and YouTube at Man in the Arena PC. Make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. That's the only place you can find our video podcast. Now let's go.
Tear down this wall. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
It is morning in America. Last episode, I told you that a Donald Trump victory would show the world that the light of liberty in the heart of Americans has not been put out just yet. After witnessing the most resounding victory for a Republican candidate since Ronald Reagan, that light may be burning brighter than I had ever dared to hope. It is certainly true that Kamala Harris was a uniquely unqualified and off-putting candidate. She was thoroughly unintelligent, unskilled, and unaccomplished. She failed to articulate her platform, and when she managed to utter a policy proposal, it was laughed out of the room. But even with the clear advantage in policy and character, Donald Trump still had to overcome a media apparatus bent on his destruction, a significant disadvantage in fundraising, and an election machine that, let's face it, is built to elect Democrats. This is a mandate. The people of America spoke loud and clear that they reject the invasion of foreign nationals into their country. They reject crime infesting their communities. They reject our children being targeted by sexual deviants. They reject the destruction of our currency. And maybe most importantly, they embrace a return to the America First tradition of our nation. However, as much as this is a mandate from the voters, this was a mandate ultimately from heaven. We are often uncomfortable speaking in spiritual language when it comes to our politics and our culture, but we cannot return to greatness as a people if we do not turn to the great pillar of American life of acknowledging that there are forces greater than ourselves that guide the destiny of man and nations. Everything that has occurred in this wild and fantastic journey of the Donald Trump years in American politics has been marked by happenings and poetic moments beyond our comprehension. When Donald Trump turned his head in a field in Butler, Pennsylvania, just as a bullet narrowly missed his skull, the mandate of heaven was made clear. Now, I can't say what the next 4 years will hold. I can give you my hopes, I can give you my ideas, but the future of America and freedom on this earth now rests in the hands of Donald Trump and the team he has assembled. What I can say with certainty is two things. First, that God has given America yet another chance. We have the opportunity in front of us to throw off the shackles of leftism, of globalism, and unbridled licentiousness and embrace a future of liberty, prosperity, purpose, and virtue. That is a gift, but also a mighty responsibility. But second, this is not the end of the war, only the beginning. Donald Trump will be president for the next 4 years, and God willing, it will be marked by success and progress, putting America first. But the enemies of liberty are not fighting a 4-year war. They are fighting a 100-year war. Our enemies will not rest. They will not relent. They will not give up just because they lost an election. Their assault on our families, our heritage, and our traditions will only intensify. So the question that remains is, how will you fight? Because if we are successful in this battle, we will be remembered as the people who brought America back from the brink, who never gave up, even when they had every reason to do so. This is the time to carve our mark into history and turn this flicker of liberty into a bonfire. Now it's time for our calibration. All right, we are here today. Like I told you, I'm Jonah Schultz. If you're tuning in here every episode, this is episode number 4 of Man in the Arena, with many more to come. I am here with my brother, Jonathan, who has joined me today.
It's good to be here. We've shared a lot of exciting things, a lot of adventures, and we can add this to the pile.
Yes, and before anybody asks who's watching this video, we're not twins. We've never been twins. He's my older brother, so you're insulting me even though you're making him feel well. So we're not twins, but this is a happy week, a week where Jonathan and I have been sharing many fantastic memes, many fantastic liberal meltdown videos, and it's just been a time where I think a well-deserved time for many of us to just enjoy it, to just soak it in and say, we just went through a rough 4 years, and it's okay to smile a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, this has been... everybody had different expectations for what was coming. I think everybody was holding their breath up until it was official. After 2020 and everything that went on, just to see these numbers come in and to still not be like waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for the bottom to drop out, waiting for a pipe to explode in Georgia, to be able to have all of these come in, to know before we went to bed, if you stayed up late enough, it was a nice change of pace. And what is to come is way more important than what just happened. But it's a good start. And
yeah,
we're off on the right foot.
It feels good. I think for so many of us, these past 4 years have been a very dark 4 years. You can really, I would say, going back to the beginning of COVID for a lot of people is when you can really start the beginning of this time period where America got to be a very dark place. A place not only that it's easy to look back and on these last 4 years and look at the economy being in shambles, to look at people not being able to afford groceries or homes, to look at the invasion on the border, to look at the crime infesting our streets. But beyond any of the measurable things like that, there has been a marked depression that has taken hold of people, of our country. And I think that's been what people are feeling even more than the pain in their pocketbooks. Is you go around and you see so many people without hope, without optimism, and the political climate and our government, the regime currently in charge, has contributed to that and really augmented that for so many people. And I think that's why you look at these 4 years and they're not just bad politically, they're not just bad in the results. They have been dark, depressing years. And for a lot of us, we didn't know if we were ever going to break out of this. And this election, I think, more than anything else right now, is giving people hope that it doesn't have to be this way.
Well, I mean, you just have to look at the numbers, the suicide rates, the drug addiction, the antidepressants, anxiety, depression, all of these things that are going on. They're all byproducts of our environment, of what we're living through, and then this lack of hope for what's to come. And so when you see those numbers and we go through these times, particularly coming out of 2020, when you see America and freedom and our existence in a totally different way than what we believed it to be. And so, I'm 38 years old, and the America that I thought we lived in looks a lot different than what I believe. But that, I think, is what brings so much hope to people now, people like me who say, okay, this is not exactly what I thought it was, but there are so many more people that align with our morals and values, the people that see the same things that we see, because it's so easy for us to be isolated, to think that we're the crazy ones, that the things that we believe, that they're some fringe ideas. Now, I never fell into that belief system because I've met enough people around the country to know that that's not true.
Yeah.
But to see that a popular vote comes out with around 4 million more Americans voting for Donald Trump, it gives hope that it wasn't just, well, we got the Electoral College, but they still won millions more votes. There is a majority of people that believe the things we do, that are actively seeing the things that we've seen and experienced, and recognizing that that's not the direction that we can keep going if we're going to survive.
Yeah, and they're at the very least saying we're going in the wrong direction. At the very least, there's a majority of people who have recognized we can't continue on this path. And Trump said something over the last few days of the campaign, I think he especially hit on it, about the state of our country, saying it doesn't have to be this way. And I think the Democrat Party and the liberal political machine has really relied on people accepting their lot in life, accepting this darkness, this depression, and saying, well, it's just the way things are, right? That's what they've done. I think there's no better example than what they've done to the black community over the past 60 years of essentially getting the black community in most of this country to accept their lives are just filled with crime, filled with drugs, filled with single motherhood, filled with all these horrible things that don't have to be the case, and thinking that their only way to survive is through the benevolence of the Democrat Party giving them handouts. And I think that's a huge tool in the Democrat Party's belt that they kind of lost in this election, where people finally, for the first time in many cases, broke out and said, I don't want to live this way. It doesn't have to be this way. I can carve something out for myself, build something for myself. I just need the opportunity and the structure of government and a nation to do so, and finally pushing back. And so that was really refreshing for me to see in you can pick it every single demographic, maybe besides black women, move towards Donald Trump. 49 out of 50 states move towards Donald Trump. So you saw this overwhelming in deep red states, in dark blue states, moving towards this different way of thinking and refusing to accept and tolerate this bowl of slop that's been put down in front of them. And I think that was, for me, something that really encouraged me for the future, that we can go into these next 4 years and not just, kind of paddle our way through, but really hit the ground running.
Yeah, I think ultimately for so many of us, I think on both sides, when you see things like the city of Detroit, for how long it's just been ravaged, yet they continue to vote the same way over and over and over again. They get into these patterns where you think that those will go on forever. And I think this is one of those election cycles where for the first time you see a shift. And I think that will be freeing for so many people moving forward to see, we tried something different. We continue to do the same thing. Generationally, we did the same thing. And you start to see some of those shifts that are happening. I think ultimately we're not going to know for a while, but this may be that first major step that then unlocks, a wave of more and more people in different communities saying, we need to do something different. And they've been lying to us. Yeah. And now's our chance but now the next step is we have to show them that their vote was worth it. Yeah. And we have to hold on and continue to attract more and more voters like that.
Yeah. And so I want to kind of shift into, okay, what happened in this election? What brought us to this moment? First of all, I want to say that if you joined us on the election preview episode, you know that I was 100% correct on my electoral map prediction. So before we get into anything else, I want to kind of spike the football on that all these election wizards and folks coming out with their maps and their polls and everything, and all you need to do is tune in to Man in the Arena, and you would have known ahead of time. I told you we dropped the map ahead of time. So I was right on that, as I am right on most things. And again, on the topic of being right, Trump, I think, proved me right on his rhetoric and what I have been saying for a very long time. So both of us have run for office. Both of us have spent a lot of time within the GOP election machine, the way business is done, the way that these people think who are the kind of politicos running things, whether it's county chairmen, whether it's candidates and congressmen, you name it. The thought has been for a long time that I thought was extremely flawed in the Republican Party, that if we just moderate ourselves enough, we'll get the black vote. If we just moderate ourselves enough, we'll get the suburban women vote. If we just moderate ourselves enough, if we just moderate ourselves on social issues here, on economics there, and we essentially lose any kind of identity as a party, we're going to start winning more votes. And I always thought this was flawed. One, because you moderate yourself enough, it doesn't, you fail to draw any kind of distinction, and you become the Democrat Party light. So even if you're successful, it doesn't accomplish anything. It maybe just pumps the brakes a little bit. And two, people need something to latch onto. People are driven to the polls. People are driven to political movements by strong, outlined, tangible principles. And the Democrat Party has done that really well for a long time. The Democrat Party has never moderated themselves on a thing in our entire lives. And they've continued to win elections because people gravitate towards strong, bold ideas. Trump in this campaign, sure, he wasn't the absolutist on abortion, and there are some issues where you can make the argument that, but I think that's more him going towards his center of beliefs more than anything else. You look at Trump down the stretch of this campaign, he ran on restoring our culture. He ran on mass deportations. He ran on, you saw commercials where Kamala is for they, them, right? He ran hard against the social leftist issues. He got stronger and stronger in his rhetoric. And as a result, not only did his base turn out, he drew in voters that didn't vote for him last time. Because I think in 2020, he ran a really wishy-washy campaign. But down the stretch here, it was strength, it was restoring culture, it was a campaign that made a clear vision. And that's something that Republicans need to learn from at every single level if they're going to see this kind of success electorally moving forward.
Well, I mean, we continue to get the squishy Republicans, the Rhino Republicans, over and over. We got the John McCains and the Mitt Romneys, and this is the first time where I would say that, I mean, you're like you said, you get them running on mass deportations. 65% of the country wants that, not just minimal deportations, mass deportations.
Yeah.
And you've got record number of Latinos voting. You run on family values, you run on not mutilating children, you run these things. You get more suburban women than you ever got. They were the group that was supposed to be, the major pitfall. They came his direction. And so we're so used to Republicans trying to moderate to say, well, we don't want to push anybody away. We have to, using all this very vague language, like comprehensive immigration reform, right?
Yeah.
We know what that means. It never leads the right direction. And so for the first time, we see this movement of saying, we're going to continue to push what we stand for because the polls are showing us that this is what people want.
Yeah.
People are not happy with this, and we're going to go on and do it. And I think this really sets the tone for how to handle the culture wars moving forward. It's not to shy away from it. It's not to try to market it in this really gentle language. It's to say, here's our problems, here's the solutions. And by the way, these may be painful initially, but what it's going to lead to is going to bring prosperity and change and try and save us from jumping off the cliff, which this was one of those elections where we say every time that these elections are the most important of our lifetime. This was one of those teeter-totter elections where you are on a knife's edge. And if it doesn't go the right way, that could be the last time because it's amnesty for illegals that have been rushed to these swing states where all of a sudden now the populations explode and they're blue solid just like California for eternity. And so major changes happen this time and it's a great blueprint forward.
Yeah, and I hope it finally puts to rest that whole narrative and that whole idea of it's not that every single Republican needs to be Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? That's not the argument that people are making. And I believe the reality is it's sometimes more perception than reality because you have people like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, right? You have people like Joe Biden was considered a moderate, right? They painted people like Hillary Clinton like a moderate. It's more in the presentation of you have somebody like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania who presents himself as this very pragmatic, moderate individual, but Sherrod Brown, nothing plays out that way in policy or in the way that they govern. So I think for Republicans, it's not that you have to run people that are like Carrie Lake or like Marjorie Taylor Greene. You can run people who give off that sense of professionalism, who give off that sense of moderation, but still are going to execute this policy and articulate. Like J.D. Vance is the perfect example of that, I think. And he's the perfect platform, or I should say the perfect illustration of the maybe perfect GOP candidate moving forward of somebody who can speak to so many different groups in a very intelligent and articulate way without softening his principles. And I think that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, you and I have talked about this. This was the best campaign of our lifetime, because you look back, we've gotten to see Trump run 3 times now. In 2016, Donald Trump's campaign, it wasn't a great campaign. It was just so unique and had never been seen before. I think that's what drew so many people in, because for the first time you had a non-politician running for president, a superstar, somebody who was so outside the box, who spoke his mind, and there was nothing presidential about that campaign, but it worked, and you had the advantage of running against Hillary Clinton, who was a deeply unpopular person as well. You look at 2020, that campaign was I think a disaster in many ways, because Trump didn't really know how to act, I think, in that campaign. He was president, but he still wasn't very presidential in his execution, where it was, you had the debates with him and Joe Biden. It was really just him yelling at Joe Biden and insulting each other. And not that Joe Biden was any more presidential than he was, but you just lost a kind of sense of who Trump was, because you didn't have the same spark. It wasn't brand new like it was in 2016, but it wasn't presidential or encouraging and making you really feel like, okay, this guy's got it together. This campaign, I think he finally figured out, him and his team, how to walk the line of, I'm still Donald Trump, but I'm the former and future president of the United States. And I think they executed that in a way that really, there were very few missteps. There were very few, anything that actually was considered a misstep was something the media tried to gin up, right? They tried to gin up like the Madison Square Garden Puerto Rican joke that most people thought was funny and nobody cared about. It wasn't going to sway anybody's vote, but they tried to turn it into like, oh my gosh, Trump's going to lose all the Latinos now because he brought this comedian on stage. Or he'd say certain things like, Liz Cheney should maybe try going to Ukraine and looking at down a barrel of a gun and seeing if she feels the same way about sending all of these boys off to war. And they tried to gin it up of, Trump's going to put a firing squad onto his political opponents. So there was never a legitimate misstep by this campaign like there had been in 2016 and 2020. And I was waiting for it the whole time, and it just never came. And I think as much as you can rag on Kamala Harris for being a terrible candidate, which she was, and running a terrible campaign, which she did, Trump, I think, was, and his team were very masterful in the way they went about this campaign.
Yeah, I mean, the steps that they followed were, he didn't, like you said, there were no missteps. And the things that were perceived missteps were just things that were yelled about on MSNBC. Right. But when it comes to going to McDonald's and tossing fries around, getting in a Trump garbage can, going to these blue areas that people were making fun of him for spending time there.
Yeah.
Because the focus was not just on, hey, I have to win these states. They obviously, their numbers internally, definitely, they were very confident about.
Yeah.
They were seeing what we weren't privy to a lot of the time. But you could see this movement. And so I think, looking ahead a little bit, not only continuing to be a campaigner in some form as president, but going to areas like New Jersey, continuing to go to places like New York, starting to
Virginia.
Going to these places that are now in play, going to these people and say, you're more than just the blue coloring that you were, on the map last time, is that here's what we have to offer. And then you have to execute on those things. But at the same time, that map is so much more open than before. I mean, California moved the most out of any state towards Donald Trump. 49, as you said, 49 out of 50 states, plus D.C., moved more towards Trump in this election. The only one was Washington State.
I think D.C. went from 1 people to 2 people who voted for Donald Trump, but still doubled it.
Whatever it takes.
But you hit on something I think is really important there, which is, as momentous as this moment is, as big of a landslide as this is for a Republican candidate to win this way, as big of a mandate as this is, if there's not the follow through, if there's not the execution, this won't matter, right? Because if voters don't feel in 4 years that they have seen, you had over 75% of voters saying the country's on the wrong track, right? That they want to see significant change. If that is not felt in a real, tangible way, if that is not seen through the effort of the and the legislation, if it does not come to pass, Republicans will get wiped out in 4 years, 2 years even, right? So you have to really strike while the iron is hot here, where the voters said, go do your thing. You have to go do it. If you don't, you're going to lose all of this momentum, and this will be looked back at as maybe the biggest missed opportunity in political history. So as much as we can celebrate now, we have to execute. We have to get things done and get them done quickly, because the Democrats are going to regroup very quickly. They're in kind of disarray right now. They're panicked, all these different things, but they're going to come knives out as soon as Donald Trump is sworn in, and you can really take that to the bank. You saw what happened in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you have this set up for a really significant run, because you have J.D. Vance, who up until this point, as a senator in Ohio, very conservative. You just never know once they get into office.
Yeah.
More conservative than we're used to having here as senators in Ohio. But he's not Trump, but he's Trump Jr.
Yeah.
And so he has the ability, like you said, he wants to face, he loves going on these shows, going face to face, toe to toe with these far left hosts, and basically dominating them for the entirety of these
embarrassing
interviews.
them.
Yes.
Yeah.
He has the messaging, but also the gravitas of being able to. I mean, a lot of people said they wish that he was running for president.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you have this, you set up this successful 4 years, you have the trajectory for so much more in the future to continue this forward. This can't just be a four-year thing and then it's over and we keep shifting back and forth. There has to be some sort of sustained. The Democrats, I mean, from Obama through here, right? They've had control almost the entire time outside of Trump's 4 years, and you see how rapidly things declined. We need a little bit of stretch to be able to move this in the right direction and to show the American people that these policies will work, not just short term, but long term. And so have to execute. The win opens the door, but there's so much work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to dig in now into some of the voting demographics and how some things shifted. I'm going to kind of take this personally a little bit as well, because I'm 29 years old. I'm still in the under 30 demographic, so I'm going to soak it in as long as I can. But we're hearing a lot of conversation, rightfully so, about black men shifting, about Latino men, specifically those two groups really shifting towards Trump. But there wasn't a bigger shift to Donald Trump than in young men. Young men under 30, and you saw some exit polls in Michigan where Donald Trump was actually winning the under 30 vote. The under 30 vote, men ages 18 to 29, moved 28 points in favor of Donald Trump from 2020. 28 points. And actually, young women moved 14 points as well. So that to me was actually more surprising, because that's the group that they just tried to beat over the head with the abortion issue the entire time. But the trend among young men specifically is extremely, extremely encouraging. And I think something that just makes total logical sense, because if you're somebody like you and I, from the time that we were kids, we were told that we were basically the cause of all the world's problems, right? That we were responsible for slavery, that we're racist, that we're sexist. Our existence is a threat to the people around us, right? That's what we were told as young men. We grew up in a system where we were the only group of people that didn't have access to certain scholarships, where we were the only group of people that didn't have access to certain jobs, that couldn't meet certain quotas, that we're really the only group that in public society, in our entertainment, in our government even, we're the only group that we're allowed to be made fun of, that we're allowed to be mocked, that we're allowed to be really put upon in a way. And I would make the argument that young men, specifically straight white men, young men, are of their age group, the only group that has known real systematic oppression and racism in this country. And they came out in a big way and rejected what they have experienced their whole lives. And to me, this was one of those very encouraging marks, because the boomers, again, they went for Kamala Harris. And the boomers, don't hate me for this, but, sometimes you frustrate the hell out of me, because you were born into this country that was riding high, and you're going out voting for Kamala Harris. You're going out voting for the mass importation of foreign nationals. That's just unacceptable. But what I've experienced and you've experienced in Republican politics is that the older group of Republicans, just speaking about Republicans and conservatives, are actually far less conservative than young Republicans are, because those individuals, those boomer Republicans, grew up in a world that was sane. They grew up in a country that was sane, to no fault of their own. They grew up to a society that had a booming economy, a growing economy, where you could afford a house working at McDonald's as on a single income and raise children and have a stay-at-home mom. You grew up in a country where there weren't drag queens reading to children in a library, right? They grew up in a country where there was just a sense of culture, of identity, of this is how the way we do things. They grew up in a society where they could more so trust their institutions, trust their medical system, their pharmaceutical industry more so than we can now. They could trust their education system a little bit more, maybe they shouldn't have. They could trust their media more, maybe they shouldn't have. You can make all of those arguments, but they lived in a much more high trust society. And then we came along, you in the 80s, me in the 90s, and we got to get a front row seat to the decline. We got to get a front row seat to abuse towards us and everything that we were taught to love by our parents who grew up in a country that was sane. So seeing this shift is encouraging that this doesn't have to be permanent, right? Just because we have an aging demographic that tends to lean more Republican doesn't mean that we're going to see a blue wave for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I would say that the term toxic masculinity was one of the most poison things that's ever been hoisted upon our society, because it automatically took an entire group of people, right, just because of their gender, and made people look at them in a negative way, right? There is a version of masculinity that is toxic. It's called, people that beat their wives, and things like that. But just being masculine is actually the foundation of every strong society. Yeah. It's every strong marriage. By saying that men need to be strong, it does not diminish women in any way possible. My wife is strong in so many ways that I am not. I'm strong in many ways that she's not, and together with our superpowers, let's call them, right, we make an incredible team. And so men and women were created with strengths that the others don't have. But when men were so easily diminished, and then young women were told that you don't need a man, that, men are this, they're that. And of course, there's bad people in every sort of thing, and there's bad relationships and things like that. But men, just as men, we need strong men in society. It's that saying, when we have weak men, bad things happen.
Yeah, we have a very feminized society at large. And I think all of these kids grew up in a world where they were subject to the finger-wagging teacher, the finger-wagging HR lady, the finger-wagging whoever. And they said, I can't maintain my own sanity or achieve my dreams or accomplish what I want to accomplish in this structure that is putting upon me in this way. And I would say, if you want to talk about toxic masculinity is when you want to sleep around and get, and if you happen to get a chick pregnant, you can take her to the abortion clinic, right? That's a much more toxic version of masculinity than wanting to lead your household or be the financer of your household or to be just a leader in your relationship. Nothing about that is toxic. It's 100% natural. And so men have had their natural inclinations. I'm not talking about your base natural inclinations to do things that we know are wrong. I'm talking about our natural inclinations to behave how we want to behave within relationships and within the world. We've had those things called evil our entire lives. And as a result, you're seeing all of these men who have had to restrain those natural inclinations and abilities inside of them. And that's why you're having these record numbers among men of depression, of loneliness, of all these different things. So it does nobody any favors at the end of the day, because as you're stopping men from living out their natural way of life, you're actually making women more miserable as well. You have all these women out there who are saying, I can't find a man that's worth hanging on to, because any man that's worth hanging on to, they've been told their entire lives they're not supposed to be that way. So this is just the natural conclusion of all of those things. But this was a flat out rejection of that in really the strongest possible terms.
Well, you look at the numbers for women where, the expectation even, on the news all night long before the votes started rolling in, which women are going to carry this for Kamala. Women are going to carry this, right?
Yeah.
And the women shifted drastically. Now, black women make up only about 7.8% of the population, but, they're a huge percentage of that voting block. But when you saw married women and single women and young women and Latino women and moving over more and more and more, I have a prediction, and it's not going on too much. I think the more that women start to see strong men, the more they're going to enjoy it. The more that they're going to see, okay.
Yeah.
So I know many women who have weak husbands that are the most unhappy women. It's not by accident, right? If you're strong together, it's great. And so I think ultimately you're going to see, if you see more of these young men that are coming out, strong men, voting a certain way, then young women are going to want to go along with that. And, again, returning back to what makes a society strong: men, strong women together. And I think those are where you start to see those cracks that are happening in kind of the past belief systems.
Well, it's just a return to what we knew as human beings for thousands of years, right? None of this stuff is new. It's simply, we had all these understandings as people, all these understandings as societies of how societies function, how the genders relate to one another, how we relate to God, and all these different things that were universal truths that we just understood. We didn't need a peer-reviewed study to tell us these things, and we don't need that now. But we've abandoned those things, and as a result, people have become more and more miserable. And while we're on the topic of gender and race and this election, there was this conversation going on that it really irked me. I saw it a lot on social media, which was this kind of dunking by Republicans on white women, that white women, they're the problem because they're the one who are going to elect Kamala Harris and this and that and the other. White women voted over 50% for Donald Trump. Numbers are still coming in, but he's going to get over 50% of white women. 90% of black women voted against him. Over 60% of Latino women voted against him. My point in bringing up all of this is that the reason that white women were the center of these attacks, and it wasn't black women are going to take Kamala over the edge and they're our problem, or Latino women or minority women or whatever else, was white people at large. They're the one group that the left allows us to insult. They're the one group that the left allows us to go after in this way. So we are always, as conservatives, fighting on the battleground and using the rhetoric that the left allows us to use. That is something that's going to have to change moving forward if we're going to have honest conversations and if we're going to have any kind of meaningful change. Because if you can insult white women continuously, even as a Republican, you're only doing that because the left is saying, hey, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to make fun of white women. You're allowed to do this just because they're white. But the minute you say something about black women who went 90% against Trump, you're a racist, awful, horrible person, we have to reject that totally. And when it comes to things like data and truth and just these basic concepts, saying things out loud that are just statistics, that's not a racist thing to do. That's not a bad thing to do. It's a good thing to do. You don't even have to say things in a racially charged way. If I say that black women voted 90% for Kamala Harris, and I think that that's a bad thing, which I do, that doesn't make me hate black women. That makes me think that black women are doing a disservice to themselves. And I should be able to say that about any ethnic group, including white people, but we're not allowed to talk that way, which is a part of the problem because it's become so ingrained in the culture of who we're allowed to reprimand and who we're not allowed to reprimand.
Well, liberals have been able to keep they're the master marketers. And so they've been able to cage the right in so many ways and trying to corner them. And then out of fear, our leaders would always control their language to be as soft and tiptoe around things as possible. On MSNBC, you had Joy Reid, who had her blonde Mike Pence hair piece on the other night and just railing against white women, that now it's there. She needs somebody of white skin color to go against. So before it was men, now she can go against women for the next 4 years and blaming them for that. This was their chance. This was their chance to get out from under this tyranny. And the fact that people like that can have a job that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
But that's what you're saying is exactly right. Is that as long, I think there's a lot of people, particularly when you see black men, that they're tired of being put in these boxes where they are expected to do things, and you have to stay within your group, and just because you were born with that skin color. They are human beings. We're all human beings, just like everybody else, and we need to stop being split into these demographics. And I think, again, when you look at the numbers of this election, when you've grown, they talk about the big tent, right, for so long, but the way that we try to engage these people was always the wrong way. They wanted the same things that white people wanted all along, at least for big percentages of, but it was always trying to kowtow to them in some sort of way.
We tried to be overly apologetic, where it was, out of one side of our mouth, we would say, we bear no responsibility as people living in the year 2024 for. I have no responsibility for Jim Crow. I have no responsibility for slavery. Right? Our family wasn't here when slavery was legal in the United States. But out of the other side of our mouths, we'll go to the black community and kind of be like, treat them as if we did something wrong to them, which we didn't. We talk to the men like you talk to a man, right? Be an adult, be a grown up. They're not children. They're adults like you and I are. They have capabilities like you and I have. Stop treating them any different than you would any other group. And I think the Republicans have gone wrong in that. And it's hard to combat the Democrats when the Democrats have gone to these groups and will literally say things like, if you're a black man, we'll give you $20,000 fully forgivable loan for your business. The Democrat Party has been in the business of bribing their voters for generations, and the Republicans have to fight against that. It's a hard thing to fight against, and that's a whole conversation about how democracy functions and is that sustainable and all of those things. But getting into... Well, before I get into this, the one thing I wanted to bring up that you said, and you kind of alluded to, is that the Democrat, there's not a person that is more racist than a Democrat who has a minority vote against them, right? Mm-hmm. If Latinos, if illegal immigrants and immigrants coming into this country voted overwhelmingly Republican, they'd be shooting them at the border, right? They would have the most big, beautiful wall that you could possibly imagine, and they would not tolerate a single illegal immigrant coming into this country. But this election, I think, can be defined very simply, which was Kamala Harris presenting the concept that we've been fed our whole lives of America, the idea. Right? We've been told our whole lives, America is just this idea. It's this abstract idea of who we are as a people, how we want to live, all, this kind of hippie gobbledygook. And Trump came out, and J.D. Vance explicitly said these things in his speech at the RNC, that America is the nation. So is America the idea versus America the nation? That, yeah, we're an idea in a sense of who we are and how we want to be. Every nation has ideas and a concept. But we are a culture, we are a nation, we are a people, right? We have blood and bone, we have soil, we have boundaries, we have a culture that we want to maintain that's an inherently American culture. We have a way of life that's an inherently American way of life. And that is something that we have been told we're not allowed to want, right? The Trump campaign, there are many people coming out and saying, America should be for Americans. And the left-wing media flipped out about it. Like, that was how is that a bad thing to say? Slovenia should be for Slovenians, right? Croatia should be for Croatians. Zimbabwe should be for Zimbabweans.
You stole my country.
And this is this is what we've been fed for so long, that we're not allowed to want America to be for us. We're not allowed to want our communities to be for us, when that's the most basic thing that any society of any nation or any community, any citizen should want, at the very least, is that this is mine. I have the ability to control it. I have the ability to contribute to it and dictate what direction it goes in. And the fruits of this nation should be for me first. And if there's excess, like there has been in America, we've been the most generous nation in the history of the world, right? So, but if you're not able to take care of your own people, I don't care about these abstract ideas about who we are.
Well, America First, again, that was a great marketing term in general.
Yeah.
And so the left was very unhappy that all of a sudden we had a term and a phrase that was having effect. And so immediately they had to turn it into, oh, that's a Nazi term.
Yeah.
That's this, you're racist, you're all of those things, right? But when you look around the world right now, you look at England and you look at France and you look at Germany and you look at the destruction that's happening. We are a large nation, and so we've been able to weather some of the things that would have crushed other nations. But if you look right in Great Britain, right, the immigration that's come there, that they've allowed, their culture is being destroyed.
Yeah.
They don't have a culture anymore because you're bringing people that don't bring any benefits to your society, and they basically, in their mind, you bring all military-age men in that share nothing with you. There is nothing, and very often under the guise of Christianity, under the guise of those things, right?
London is an Islamic city.
No, they're marching through the streets covered in burqas, waving black Islamic flags. Yeah. That is a takeover. That is not what we can be. Compassionate, we can be helpful, we can be generous, but what we can't do is just open our doors up. And again, that's why this election turned out the way it did, because there's a lot of people who have looked other places and said, America needs to be first. And that doesn't mean we stop being generous, but it means that if we're destroyed, the world implodes.
Well, there's nothing left. There's nowhere else to go, right? Unless Elon Musk colonizes Mars. Right, that's really legitimately the next option outside. There's nowhere to go because the rest of the world has pretty much fallen, right? You have a couple, states that are holding out like Hungary and others, and you hope some countries can turn the tide. But we are at such a pivotal moment because we are on the edge of a cliff. But in a positive way, I think one thing that has contributed to this shift that has been that you felt, there is a shift going on right now that I really want to talk about, and this is not anything that's measured in data or anything. This is purely anecdotal from our experiences, but I think most people would agree. There is a shift in being. It's now cool to be a Trump supporter, right? It's cool to be a Republican or conservative because for my lifetime and beyond, it was you were like the dorky Republican, right? You're not cool, right? Barack Obama, he's the cool black guy and he's a Democrat. Mitt Romney, he's kind of the nerdy, lame Mormon dude, and John McCain is John McCain, and we just all the celebrities that were Democrats, and now it's become incredibly cringy to be a Democrat, right? These are the most cringy people I've ever seen. When they get out and perform, the things they say, Ben Stiller and other people getting on the white dudes for Harris calls, it's pathetic. It makes me uncomfortable just watching these people. And then you got Hulk Hogan tearing his shirt off, flexing his muscles, and he's like 70 years old or whatever he is, still roided up. And it's just cool to be a Trump supporter. And you're seeing this around the college campuses. You see it on TikTok. You see all these videos of it is the cool frat kids. It's the cool athletes. It's the good-looking women who are the Trump supporters, who are the Republicans. It is the loners. It is the theater kids. And don't get me wrong, we're not against theater because our mom, we love the theater. We grew up, our mom an opera singer, so we got nothing against the musical arts. But theater kids are a breed of their own. And you have the overweight, blue-haired lesbian chicks, right? That are it's a visual difference, and you can almost go through a crowd and pick out the people of, okay, that person's voting for Donald Trump. That person's not voting for Donald Trump. There's an aesthetic difference, and there is that pride now that is coming back in, this is my country. This is how I'm going to fight for it. And just there's a coolness in loving your country again. And that leads you to vote for Republicans because they're the only legitimate option for somebody who loves their country right now. And that's a really cool thing to witness because of the looks that I would get through my whole life of, because I was an athlete. I was in college, and when I'd say like, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, people would be like, really? You're conservative? That's weird. That's a weird thing to be. Why? They couldn't really ever articulate it, but it was culturally taboo to be a Republican in many ways. And now it's the cool, trendy, anti or counterculture that is the Trump supporting Republicans and conservatives. And that alone, I think is shifting the youth vote in a big way.
Well, if you look at young people, and I just saw the article about what some of the Ivy League schools were doing in reaction to Trump winning, they were having cookies and milk, Lego stations. University of Oregon had a duck there to help calm people. That's not a joke. That's
like Peter
real.
Pan syndrome.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And so these are legal adults. These are people that supposedly, because they're going to Harvard and Yale and Princeton, that they are going to be among our best and brightest, but they can't handle that their candidate for president didn't win, right? And they need cookies and milk and someone to hold them. That's a big problem. So when you see the other side of young people, whether it's young men or young women, right? I have 3 children of my own. My 2 oldest are 9 and 8, and they go to a school that's in the suburbs and with a lot of suburban women moms. And these kids were going around in class talking about their parents voting for Trump. You didn't have anybody walking around saying, my parents are voting for Kamala, right? And so there's this, what they're seeing at home, there's this excitement in the home because, little kids aren't going to be like Trump, 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 right, unless they're seeing it, they're hearing it. So there is this wave of energy that's happening where, as you're saying, there's a shift away from looking and saying, there's something about that I really don't like. And when you see cookies and milk for legal adults because they didn't get their way, that's going to continue to push people in the wrong direction. Going back again to the strong men, to all this kind of stuff. There are these major shifts that I'll be honest, I didn't believe they were going to happen. Because it just felt so overwhelming. The blue-haired people running around. It felt like they were too much to overcome. But I think ultimately, this is one of those moments where you look back and you pray that this is those tipping points where it's not just, adults that are changing, that the generations to come are going to see there's a better way than what we've been on. Yep.
So while we're on the topic of these different trends that are going on within throughout the political spectrum, there's one that made me very pleased when I saw it and I thought was very interesting for a variety of reasons. But dads in exit polling, dads went 60% for Trump. Which isn't surprising. I might be even surprised it didn't go a little bit higher than that, but 60%, that's a pretty solid number. I bring this up because you and I are both dads, and we both have girls. We both have a girl. And there was this trend that you saw on social media that was, when you want to talk about cringy, this was as cringy as it gets, which would be these men, and they would always be white men, typically. They'd be white men in their 30s, typically, kind of like trying to look really masculine and saying, I'm a Republican. I live in a rural area. I'm in a swing state, but I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I'm voting for Kamala Harris to protect her reproductive rights in the future. And when you really think about it, what that statement really is I'm a man of a 3-year-old daughter, and I want her to have as much unprotected sex with as many strangers as possible. And if she gets pregnant, I want her to kill my grandchild. That is the actual statement that is being made there. A statement that is so insane. I have a 1-year-old daughter. I can't fathom thinking about her in the future aborting my grandchild. And that's the reason that I would vote for a particular candidate. It's sickening as a dad, as a parent, obviously, but it shows such a moral depravity that it makes your stomach turn to a certain degree to put yourself in somebody's shoes like that. I am somebody who voted for Donald Trump because I want to protect my daughter and ensure that she doesn't have to play against men, and if she decides to play a sport, that I don't have to worry about sending her to a public restroom because there might be a 50-year-old dude in a dress in that restroom. There are many. I voted Republican because I don't want to worry about her walking the streets in our communities. I don't want to have to worry about her being raped by an illegal alien. Right? There are many, many legitimate reasons to vote for your daughter. For your daughter to have unprotected sex without responsibility and to abort your grandchild is the most sickening and just depraved reasoning that I can ever imagine a human being having.
I mean, first of all, abortion was not on the ballot. I mean, Roe v. Wade was overturned. It went to the states. A lot of states, unfortunately, have been passing a lot of, pro-abortion measures. Now, Florida didn't pass. They have that 60% limit, which I think, if you're having a constitutional amendment, every state should have that.
That should be the case.
And so I think the saddest part about the whole thing, first of all, I'll talk about the dads, the men. Those are not men, right?
No.
Those are men that either are controlled by their wives to say, I'm for this, honey, because I know that you are, right? But no,
that is toxic masculinity.
Yes.
That is, or it's more toxic femininity of a man. It's a womanish man more than it is any kind of sense of anything masculine. But
right, and the freak outs that continued to happen was we're getting our rights taken away. As women, we're getting our rights. What rights? What rights don't you have? And nothing changed. Nothing changed overnight. The sky is not falling. Your rights have not been taken. They're never going to be taken. What we're saying, and I have to say this when you're talking about the abortion. My mom's pro-life. My wife is pro-life. My grandmas are pro-life. My mother-in-law, God bless her, is pro-life. So all the women in my life are pro-life. So just because I'm a man doesn't mean that I can't talk about this issue, right? I love my daughter and I love the women of this country, but I love human beings. Mm-hmm. And abortion is not a women's issue. Abortion is a human issue. Are we the kind of people that are going to respect life, cherish life? The more that you saw any society throughout all of human history not love life, not work for life, not fight for life, that was the beginning of the end for that society, because it's not just the unborn that we don't see, that are hidden within their mother's womb, and then we can easily dispose of it and we never see it, right? It's about, if we can do that to the most unprotected version of humanity, because all of us know, if you don't know what abortion is, look it up, right? What they do. But on the other side of it is this: every single baby in a mother's womb, even when it was the size of a grain of sand, turned into us.
Yeah.
There's no argument. There's not some in between, like, oh, maybe that turns into it. No, that turns into a human life, and we all know that. So the argument then becomes, do you still believe that that's okay? With science the way that it is and what we know, there's no argument anymore about what is that or whatever. It's a clump of cells. No. It's a human being. And so ultimately, again, to close this thought out, it's not about women's issues. It's not about men's issues. It's about, for humanity, who do we want to be? Now, if you have a pregnancy you're in a really difficult situation, and yes, we need to care for them. We need to help these women. Right? Men shouldn't be allowed to just impregnate and run, right? There's all of these kind of situations where we say, but the whole situation always comes down to, well, if every time we get in the situation, then we'll just kill the baby. And there's so much more to it than that, but it's not out of trying to control or take away rights. It's about a love for humanity that our society is lacking, and we need to get back to that in every single area, and that's just one of them.
Yeah, and I think you can have a reasonable position. When people are pro-life, but they want exceptions for rape, for incest, for those extreme scenarios, I don't agree with it personally, but I can understand where that thought process comes from, right? I think that's a reasonable position to have from the standpoint of where I understand where that can logically stem from, because it still stems from a standpoint of empathy and of love, right? Because you're just in a terrible position that nobody should ever find themselves in.
By the way, all of those are under 1%.
Well, that's what I was just about to bring up here, is the fact that if you look at the data from the CDC, incest is the one that's brought up the most often because it's the most horrible to imagine. 0.01% of pregnancies are because of 0.01% of abortions are because of incest. 0.15% are due to rape, right? So you're talking about, between incest and rape, the two most cited reasons, 0.16%, right? So you're talking at the standpoint for, if you put all these numbers again, between 97 and 98% are simply an elective choice, right? There's not even a fetal abnormality or anything like that, you're getting into very eugenics type ground when you're saying this person's life isn't, I'm going to kill this person because they have Down syndrome, right? And you look at certain states or certain nations that have eliminated people with Down syndrome, and they'll brag about it, but they won't tell you how they did it. They just killed all of them. But one thing that I found comical in this situation, comical in the sense of you kind of have to laugh, or it's just the stupidity of people is so frustrating. There was this TikTok video that was circulating of like these women from Denmark, and they were all kind of linked arms and looking really tough. And they're talking about to the women of the United States, we stand with you, you're about to lose all your rights, blah, 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 blah. In Denmark right now, there's a 12-week abortion ban throughout the country. We are on par. If you look at any civilized society in the Western world, all of them have limits on abortion, almost all of them under 15 weeks. I think almost exclusively all of them 20 weeks or less. We are on par with North Korea, China, and some African nations as far as what we allow to take place. And it is so frustrating because these women have been brainwashed. They talk about the Handmaid's Tale, right? They talk about what Republicans are going to do to them and take away their rights. They are actually, in this case, they are only treating themselves as the baby-making machine, right? They view their world. If this is your number one issue as a voter, you view your world solely through the lens of, I can produce babies, right? And selfishly from the standpoint of, I don't want to take any kind of precautions myself to keep this from happening. I just want to have the ability to end this if necessary for any reason. And again, my frustration with people like this is I can look at somebody who thinks that there should be 12 weeks to have an abortion or something like that, and I can have a legitimate conversation with them and understand where they are coming from most of the time. People like this, they look at somebody like me who I believe that we shouldn't have abortions. I'm not thinking about my 1-year-old daughter having abortions because I believe every life is valuable and has a distinct, important mark and purpose from God. They will look at that statement and say, well, you just hate women. Right. And that's what they've been. And that's what's so frustrating. They've been beaten over the head with that their whole lives. And they've just become robots like beep, boop. You hate women, beep, boop. And it's like you can't have a reasonable conversation with them. And that's where the difficulty lies sometimes is how do you go about changing the mind of a person like that? You really can't. So you really just have to pursue what's right, despite the fact of what you're going to be labeled as a result.
Yeah, I have a very sensitive to this issue because, I ran a nonprofit organization for over a decade for people with special needs. And one of the stories that I heard very early on was from a couple who had a child with Down syndrome. And at that time, he was over 20 years old. Just if you've never met someone with Down syndrome, they are the most joyful, incredible people that if you could inject their joy into every human being, this world would be as close to perfect as possible.
Yeah.
And they told me the story about how when they had their ultrasound, that they came back and the testing showed that the child was going to have Down syndrome. The first question that doctor asked was, do you want to end the pregnancy? And since I heard that story, now I've known what abortion. We went to a private high school, where they were very pro-life, and they brought in an anti-abortion presentation where they showed us exactly what it was when I was 16 years old, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. And then being a father and going through that process, knowing these innocent babies. But again, to go back to what you said, there's countries that brag about their 0% Down syndrome rate.
Yeah.
It's not that you have 0% Down syndrome, it's that you murdered them all.
Yeah.
And so to me, this issue, again, it comes back to, there's so many women, like you said, that they're scared and they're taught this way their whole life, so they don't know any different. And so what I'm interested to see is over the next 4 years, when they don't have their rights taken away, like they say, when nothing happens, when there's no back alley abortions with with hangers, that are they going to say, okay, are they going to see the way they felt and see, I have nothing to be afraid of, or are they going to be so easily manipulated moving forward? That's one of the big shifts I think has to happen for all of Americans, is how easily we're pulled into these narratives that are just not true.
Yeah. Well, the encouraging thing I think out of all this is that you did see the shift to Trump.
Yes.
Right? Despite if you were watching cable television or anything streaming or wherever you got commercials, if you got a Kamala Harris commercial, or here in Ohio, we got the Sherrod Brown commercials or anti-Bernie Moreno commercials, the only messaging in all of these commercials was they're going to stop you from getting abortions. They're going to stop you from getting abortions. So it was the issue for the Democrats across the country. So to see this shift among young women, maybe that issue is losing a little bit of its punch. At the very least, that maybe the silver lining that we can take out of this is that hopefully that, as men, that we see this shift and men maybe embracing a more masculine role, women will follow along with that and embrace their true feminine role in society. And feminine, the word feminine gets a bad rap. Like, what we've done in society, and I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but what we've done as a society is we've labeled everything that women are naturally good at as somehow bad, right? And so what we've tried to do is take women and just turn them into men and make them exactly the same. So as a result, we just have men, and then we have second-rate men, because women aren't built to be that way. It's to be the same way if you tried to make a man into a woman, which we have. It makes men worse people. It makes women worse people. And the term feminine was always thought of as in much more of a high regard than being masculine, right? Because the feminine nature of women was what made the world go round, was what made society be able to function. And at some point, starting a long time ago, but in the 60s, when it really came to a culmination, we started teaching women that it's bad to be feminine. It's actually good to act, whether it's sexually, culturally, in the workplace, exactly like a man. And now we have all these miserable women who all they can think about is the next chance they're going to have to kill their unborn child. And it's a tragedy because you have robbed countless millions of women and men of their ability to lead happy lives. And I think ultimately that's the biggest tragedy, is people have lost their purpose and their ability to just get joy out of this life. And I understand that people being in a different situation. I mean, my wife and I, before we were married, we got pregnant unexpectedly. I was scared. It never crossed my mind to do anything different than have our baby girl. But I understand how it can be a scary situation when something comes around that's unexpected. That doesn't mean you get to kill somebody, especially somebody who is as innocent comes. And, there's the arguments of, well, it's just a clump of cells. Well, you're a clump of cells. I'm a clump of cells. Whoever's making that argument, just a clump of cells. We just happen to all be at different stages of that. And they'll say, well, it can't survive on its own. Well, most of the people making that argument can't survive on their own either. Most of the people making that argument are living in their parents' basement, right? When can a kid survive on their own? Can your 9-year-old survive on their own? No, they can't. So you got a long time to go before they can survive on their own. So my whole point in all of this is, when you look at all of these issues, abortion, I think, is just a really perfect example, is every policy that we have pursued as a nation for 50 years has just made people more depressed, has made people lose their purpose, has made people lose the things that make life worth living. And at a certain point, you have to look at all of this and examine and maybe make the case that it has to be intentional, that you are knocking people off of their purpose and making them miserable because it makes them easier to manipulate and control.
Yeah, I think, that sums it up really well, which is, you've talked to women so many who will talk about having abortions and what it has done to them, right? Mm-hmm. It's more than just the life that is lost, but the life that is damaged that continues on with that, right? And so, at the end of the day, you want to always go back to women. We love you. That's why we believe in life. Yeah. It's men and women and humanity. It's saying that we understand that there could be all these difficult circumstances, and as a society, we need to do a much better job of giving you the resources and the compassion and to help you through the difficult times. But as you said, Margaret Sanger, when she founded, Planned Parenthood, and abortion wasn't the end of what she wanted. She was if you were a poor family, that she was for, killing one of your children to make ends meet, right? So the original intentions of this act, particularly in modern days, it wasn't this compassionate thing.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but it comes back to the same argument that we're making about America, the idea, and like this economic zone. The abortion argument a lot of times comes down to viewing you as just a milking cow, right? Of like, you are a person who has a dollar value associated with you. And if you are a woman and your job is to go work in a high rise and fill out spreadsheets for 8 hours a day and make $60,000 to $70,000, that is considered more valuable to the state, considered more valuable to the economy than you at home raising a literal human being, right? Which sounds a lot more fun and a lot more meaningful than filling out some spreadsheets. But you will be told as a woman that somehow your life is being derailed by having this child, not actually beginning into a new, fruitful, meaningful, joyous period. And I mean, having kids, it's a hard thing to do. It's not easy. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. You know, my baby girl's getting 3 teeth right now. It's not fun when you're rocking her at 3 o'clock in the morning and you got to get up for work pretty soon. But there is nothing that will, and any parent will tell you this, there's nothing that brings you more joy, more satisfaction, and more meaning. And these people are being robbed of that, and it's not being replaced with anything meaningful, right? And at the same time, like you alluded to and said, they are then not alleviated from the circumstance. They carry that with them for the rest of their lives, right? They carry that guilt and that shame, unfortunately, that comes with the abortion process, and knowing everybody at in their heart really knows. Everybody knows it's a child. Everybody knows what is being done. I think that's what it comes down to in many ways too, is it's not just people don't know, it's that they do know. And that's what makes it even harder to sometimes sympathize, maybe, because it's like, you know what you're doing. But I think that there are some positives to take away with the shift in women, with the shift in, with the, you know, we saw these abortion amendments fail in a couple states, including Florida. But, you know, I think it's an issue that's losing its sting a little bit. And as people embrace a love for country, a love for self, a devotion to a higher purpose, you'll see that issue have less and less sting. But I do want to move on into another topic here that I think is important. And as we get out of 2024, we were told in 2020, okay, 2020 was the most free and fair election, the safest election in the history of the world. Nothing else even came close. It was so safe. It was so fair. If you're looking at the numbers, and there's this handy dandy graph that I have in front of me, you'll see that the Democrat vote was essentially exactly the same, the popular vote, the amount of Democrats who voted in 2012, in 2016, and 2024. And somewhere along the line, they found about 20 million extra votes in 2020. This graph doesn't correlate the same way with Republicans either. Am I supposed to seriously believe that Joe Biden was 20 million votes more popular than Kamala Harris or Barack Obama twice? Am I really supposed to believe that during the COVID pandemic, when everybody was scared for their lives, that more people voted? Am I supposed to believe that after all of this, of Trump winning all of the bellwether counties in 2020, in 2016, and now in 2024, that 2020 just happened to be the craziest outlier in American history, and Trump now in 2024 only lost one state that requires voter ID? I have been kind of wishy-washy on the issue of 2020 in some ways, where I always talk about it being a spectrum where there's the folks that say it was completely stolen, right? The machines were rigged and just stolen. Then there were a lot of people who said this was rigged because of mail-in voting and all this different stuff. And then there were the people who were definitely the craziest of them all who said this was the most free and fair election in American history. I always find myself kind of fluctuating between somewhere in that middle ground. But watching this election, how this is played out, and seeing the voting totals, I just feel like the folks who have talked about 2020 and the irregularities should probably feel pretty vindicated right now. And I think that if Trump wants to really leave a lasting impact in this administration, something has to be done on the federal level to regulate our elections and make sure that whatever happened in 2020 can never happen again. And the fact that Nevada and Arizona are still taking this long to count their ballots, I think California only got like halfway done within a week. It's just not acceptable in a free society, in a sacred democracy, to have this going on.
Well, Florida is the third biggest state, most populous state in the nation. They counted 9 million votes in 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not by accident. I was waiting, and it didn't take long for somebody on, I believe it was on Fox, one of their Democrat, mouthpieces, to say, 12 million people didn't show up.
Yeah.
As if that big gap of 12 million Democrats did not show up.
12 million.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Right. No. And so then you started to see that parroted around. Well, if those 12 million that came out in 2020, had showed up again. No. Those people are either they were dead, they were voting 17 times, they were made up names.
They were in the back of a box truck getting dumped off into a...
Right. They were just numbers continue to be tallied up. So it didn't take long for that. But yeah, I mean, one of the first things I said to you after he won was one of the first things they should do is make voter ID a national law.
Yeah.
That all 50 states must have voter ID. Now, I'll have to go through the courts. The great thing is that we have the top court in the land where you would, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, every country in the world, every stable country in the world has voter ID.
Yeah.
And there was this picture going around on X of Selena Gomez. She was voting in a drop box. And there are all these Europeans that are going, in the United States, you can just drop your ballot into a box. It blew people's minds, right? Because how does that make any sense that you can just walk down the sidewalk with your vote for president of the United States and just put it in a box? Just put it in a random box that happens to be there. Who knows who's picking up? Who knows where it's going from there? Who knows who actually put it in the box? But it's getting counted all the same. And Florida in 2000 was the laughingstock, right? They were ground zero for problems in elections. And it just goes to show that none of this stuff has to take place. It's all a choice, right? If Florida made the decision, okay, we're just going to get this right. We're just going to do it. And they did it. It wasn't a problem. It doesn't keep anybody from voting. Arizona could do it next election if they wanted to. There's no reason that Florida, like you said, the third largest state in the country, can count their votes in 2.5 hours. But Maricopa County is going to take 2 weeks to count their votes.
Well, I mean, when you look at Nevada and Arizona and you look at kind of the late dumps that happened in Wisconsin and Michigan and the Senate races there, I mean, it goes back to if we're going to be able to, I mean, they'll call us election deniers and all this, but you can alleviate those issues in a lot of ways if you would just do things efficiently.
Yeah.
But when all of a sudden, when you look at Michigan, for instance, and their Senate candidate with Mike Rogers, correct?
Yeah.
He's up by 4 or 5% with a huge percentage in. I went to bed at 3:45 a.m. and he was winning by 4 or 5%. I wake up the next morning at 8:30 and he's losing.
It always happens during that time.
And it only goes in one direction, by the way.
They never find Republican ballots overnight.
No, in Nevada with Sam Brown, they just had a big vote dump that, surprise, now he's down by 1% when he was up by, 0.5% or whatever. And it only goes in one direction. And it only happens in specific states.
Yeah.
And so the only way that you can alleviate some of these problems is if you, again, I think there should not be 30 days of voting. There should not be it opens it up for all of these issues. And we've said it a million times, and we saw the realities of that in 2020, but you're still seeing some of that. I believe that we have at least 56 senators right now, Republican senators, if it wasn't for some of these dumps.
If we just have a sane system.
Right.
Yeah.
And the second thing I'll say real quick that I think hasn't got enough attention is that in some of these races, with Mitch McConnell in charge, he was sending bags of millions and millions and millions of dollars to people like Larry Hogan, who is a Democrat running as a Republican.
Total chump and not going to win.
No, lost by 8%.
Yeah.
While in in Nebraska, the Senate candidate barely won in a state like Nebraska, and she got pennies compared to him. They didn't send money to Ted Cruz. Now he's in Texas, but they still weren't giving him money. Mitch McConnell was picking and choosing. And so then in these other races like Wisconsin and Michigan, where they were given hardly any money because Mitch McConnell doesn't really want conservatives, now he's stepping aside, and we have to be very careful about who we pick as Senate Majority Leader. But those kind of decisions had massive impacts. If you would have sent more money to these states that were actually competitive and not to just the people that he wanted, that could have changed the numbers too. But circling back to what we're talking about, it really does come down to, it's very obvious that the states that do it well, there's no reason that every state can't do it that way. But it opens it up for so many more problems when they don't.
So 2020, I think, with a lot of certainty right now, we can, and you talked about, you used the word alleviate. we, at the very least, even if this is a figment of everybody's imagination, which I am highly skeptical of, just do it in a different way to give people some peace of mind, right? At the bare minimum, people act like you're crazy for questioning this, but you're doing it in the most sketchy way possible. And I think that's the frustrating part, is it's not just you're eroding trust. You've eroded, not that you deserve any trust, but you've eroded any trust that you have or that you had in the past. And this is why election reform is needed. Even if you're somebody who doesn't think that there's any shenanigans going on, you at the very least have to say, we gotta hone this in a little bit. We gotta scale this back a little bit to give people confidence that their vote matters, right? You saw precincts in Milwaukee that have 100% voter turnout, right? That doesn't happen. There's not a precinct that's ever existed that got to 100%. Maybe except that precinct in New Hampshire that has like 5 people voting. That might be the only one. But legitimately, especially in a urban precinct, which are notorious for the lowest turnout, having 100% voter turnout is laughable. And obviously, there's something going on. At the very least, we have to rebuild trust among the people, which is what Trump and the Republicans have the mandate to do. So I think that's a good segue into what's going to be next. We talked a little bit about the fact that this is a mandate, that things are shifting in Trump's direction, that he did better in 49 out of 50 states, that they have all of this momentum, but they can lose it in an instant, right? They can lose this in 2 years and 4 years if they don't do what's necessary. So what needs to be done? And this is a hard question because you look at what's on Trump's plate right now. It's like, oh, where do you start, right? It's like, you got the elephant in front of you, you got to do it one bite at a time. But what have to be the priorities? Because Trump's going to be in there for 4 years. In my opinion, there is not a plausible way that Donald Trump can do everything that needs to be done in 4 years. It's just not. You can't. There's so many problems. There's so many things that need to be addressed. 4 years just isn't enough time. So what needs to be the priorities moving forward? I've talked about this a lot on this show. I think you'll probably agree with me. To me, the number one issue, the number one thing that needs to be addressed is immigration. If you don't address immigration, nothing else really matters at the end of the day. Because what has been done, I've talked about it, in 2040, you're on pace to have over 80 million foreign-born individuals living in this country. That's a total cultural shift. That's a total electoral shift. That is a absolute catastrophe for the native-born American voter, who the more that is imported into your country as far as foreign nationals, the less your vote means, right? Your vote carries less and less weight. If you don't close the border, if you don't deport, in my opinion, about 20 million people and drastically reform legal immigration, where we are ensuring that we have a stricter quota on who can come into this country, right? We can no longer accept 2 million people a year. We have to ensure that people who are coming in are going to be net producers, right? Because we have for how many years had, and people will talk about, oh, we're just bringing in people who are contributing to the workforce. We have no net benefit from our immigration at this point because of the government benefits that are soaked up by so many of these immigrants, legal and illegal. So to me, if you don't fix that, forget the trend among young men, it's not going to matter, because those trends, even if everything trends in the right direction and you're winning more young men, more young women, you're winning more Latinos and blacks, at the end of the day, if you're just shipping in millions and millions of people, you're still going to lose at some point. There is a breaking point that we've overcome right now. Trump overcame it, and he did it by winning more young men, by winning white women. He did it by winning more black men and Latino men. He did it in a lot of ways. That's not going to matter if you are up against this tidal wave of immigration that is not just affecting our border states, not just affecting our major cities, it is in our smallest communities. And you look at, there's this town in Germany right now, a town of 600. They just had 500 refugees dumped in their town, even though they voted against it. They said, we're not going to do this. The government of Germany said, too bad, you're taking them. That's that's looking into the future for us. It's already happening, but that's going to get ramped up. And if Trump doesn't address that and fast, nothing he does, even if he accomplishes some things these 4 years, it's not going to last.
By the way, an important note, in Springfield, Ohio, where the Haitians are eating the dogs and cats, moved 6% towards Trump in this election.
Yeah.
So,
wonder why.
Yeah. And so here's the reality is that when you look at something like, you look at the drugs, you look at the human trafficking, you look at all of those major things, you shut those things off as much as possible. He talked about going after the cartels in his last term. He did not do it to the fullest extent. That's one thing that has to happen. But when you build it out from there, you look at, and the CEO of Zillow, right, which is the House website, we'll call it. He was on, I believe, CNBC, and they were asking him, President Trump says that if we get rid of, we deport a lot of illegals, that it's going to free up the housing market. Now, he was very careful not to directly answer the question, but he said it over and over, which was, if we have more availability of homes, the prices are going to go down. If we have less competition for these homes, it's going to go down.
Which is so blatantly obvious,
yes.
Right? Trump was in the debate, it was actually in the J.D. Vance debate, when he was being asked by the moderators with a straight face, and Tim Walz looking at him with a not straight face, looking at him like, what do you mean? What do you mean that deporting illegal immigrants, what do you mean having 10 million less people in this country is going to ease housing prices? They're not that stupid. They know, right? It's basic supply and demand. You literally learn this when you're in grade school of if there's more of a demand for something, prices go up. If there's more availability, prices go down. It's the most basic fact of economics that one could even fathom. So they played dumb on this thing the whole time. And you obviously had people like this guy from Zillow that probably didn't speak out too much and they don't want to get too political maybe. But the reality is, of course, you'd have to be an idiot to think otherwise. So those issues you have a lot of issues like that are linked, right? Because the housing prices need to get under control. Like we're a young family, young growing family, and we want to look to upgrade into a new home, but you're looking at what's available for the prices. There's not very many people out there that can afford a decent home. There's really just not.
No, and people are paying higher rents for an apartment that's 3 or 4 times smaller than what I live in for that my mortgage is in my house, right? And so these things aren't right. Now, when the main argument for not deporting illegals is, well, who's going to pick the fruit?
Yeah.
Right? That they don't have any real reason. It's just trying to, that to me, that's racist. They don't just pick fruit.
I'll pick it if they pay me enough.
Yeah, right. Well, if I don't need somebody to take my order at McDonald's and cook my fries, well, I need Trump to cook my fries, obviously, but
actually get extra salt.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah. But you can automate all of these kind of things. But the argument, and you said this before on the show, which is if our main argument for the benefits of anybody in society, and especially illegal immigrants, is that they pay taxes and they shop at the local Walmart, that's not a real great sales pitch for why they should remain here.
Yeah. Well, there was this great clip from when Trump was president of this woman, I don't know if she was some kind of celebrity or something. She was on The View, and she said about illegal immigrants, she's like, well, who's going to clean your toilet, Donald Trump? And she got a lot of blowback for that for obvious reasons. But it shows how these people actually view illegal immigrants, where I know that they're human beings just like us. I don't think the left views them as human beings. They view them in a very scummy, dirty way. Like these are kind of like dirty underclass. I need somebody who's gonna wash my car and take out my garbage and clean my toilet. Like those are dirty jobs for dirty people, right? That's kind of how they view those folks. And my view is exactly what you said. If we're making an argument based purely on the GDP of all of this, then that's not the full conversation. It's about culture. It's about all these different things. It's about safety. But Americans deserve to have a shot to have jobs in their own country, right? I want American jobs to be for American citizens. The same thing. I want this country to be for Americans. I want American jobs to be for Americans. It's not anything radical. It's not anything outside the box. It's what human beings in every nation believed up until about 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's really a straightforward, and this is the last thing I'll say on this topic, which is it's a very simple analogy, which is if someone breaks into your home, it doesn't matter whether they've been there 3 hours or they've been there 20 years. it doesn't make it their home. It doesn't all of a sudden that we have this ability to just, now in some states they did, right?
Yeah,
They had to go around. If I break into your home when you're not there and I'm staying out, it's mine.
You can't get me out.
Gotcha. But the reality is that, yes, we can have empathy for them as human beings, but it doesn't change the dynamics of what occurred for them to be here. They broke our laws, and whether they broke our laws because they were allowed by the people that run our country to come here or not, it doesn't change that the laws were. Now, if you want to come up with some sort of, for when you get these people out, some sort of pathway for the non-criminals, right? Maybe they get their own aisle on the way back in. They have to meet certain things, right?
Yeah.
I'm for those kind of things if they are the kind of people that have been. But at the same time, Trump talked about yesterday about how he's going to get rid of birthright citizenship, which that's that's one of the big attractors for people coming to this country. They get across the border, have their baby, and all of a sudden their baby's a citizen. That was just nuts from the beginning.
Right.
But here's the thing. It's going to be painful. We're going to see images on, if they remember at the border where the ICE agent was on a horse and just his reins were a little bit long, and they said they were whipping the migrants, right?
Oh, my
and so when you start to see people being taken out of their houses and you see all the tears and the things that are going to happen, yes, for every single human being, that's going to have some sort of impact. But it doesn't change the dynamics of we wouldn't have to do this if the laws were upheld, if the people that ran this country did what they were supposed to do, what they swore to do. None of this would have to happen. But when you've gone so far in one direction, think of it simply like this. If you're somebody that is trying to get in shape, right? It's so much harder to get in shape than it is to get out of shape, right? If I eat 20 gallons of ice cream every single day, and I've done this for 5 years, it's going to be really hard to get back, but I have to.
Well, the further you get in the hole,
yes,
right, the deeper you are.
So we're so far into this now that, it's going to be painful. It's going to be difficult, but it must happen, or else we are not going to get the changes that we need.
Yeah, and they're gonna try to take advantage of the good graces of the American people. They're gonna show the worst possible images. But I did love the one of the border individuals, I forget the guy's name. He's one of the more prominent border figures, but he was asked by, I think it was on 60 Minutes or something, where he was asked, can we do the deportation without separating families? He's like, yeah, they can be deported together. Right?
By the way, I heard that he's top of the list for Homeland Security.
Yeah, which would be tremendous. And I think, again, we talk about empathy so much. If you were really an empathetic person, you wouldn't have allowed this to happen. Right, you have put these people in this situation. I didn't put these people in this situation. If it were up to me, they would have been at their home together, and they wouldn't have to be deported. Right, they would be back in their wherever they'd like to be, or maybe they would have came in legally through a process. But at the end of the day, they are going to attack us with the images and really try to break the will of the people. Where so much of what's going to go on over the next 4 years is going to depend on people like us not breaking to that pressure. And obviously for most Americans right now, and they look at the Trump administration, they're going to talk about, how do we ease my cost of living? I can't afford to live. How do we ease my groceries? We can talk about energy policy, we can talk about all these things, but immigration, again, is linked to all of these things, right? You're competing with these people for food. You're competing with these people for housing. You're competing with these people for energy. So that is, I think, immigration is a catch-all issue in many ways. You want to talk about crime, right? When you bring in all these undocumented people, what do you think is going to happen? They're harder to monitor. They're harder to keep track of. Their first act as coming into our country was breaking the law. So they are, all of them, criminals in one way or another. They've had to break many laws to be able to stay here and to function in society, whether it's forging identification or working illegally or any of these things. And we should hold the businesses accountable too, who are taking advantage of this cheap labor, right? It's not just a one-way street. And I think that's where we get painted all the time, is you just hate Mexicans or something like that. No, we want to live in a fair and just society that gives the highest quality of life to the greatest amount of people. But there is a line there. As soon as you start crossing that line of, we're trying to do too much for too many people, the quality of life of everybody starts to diminish. And I think that's why a lot of people, for the first time, maybe have experienced that firsthand, and they don't like it.
Yeah, and ultimately, too, when 2/3 of Americans are for this.
Yeah.
Right? He has to do it immediately.
Yeah.
This has to be done starting day one because you have the momentum, you have the mandate, you have all of these things. You can't because again, winning opens the door, but you can't let the momentum for these more painful things kind of ease their way out. You can't put it in the hands of people like Mike Johnson, as Speaker of the House to say, we're going to pass things to do this, because they'll drag their feet. Paul Ryan, we know what happened. They had the House, the Senate, the presidency. They got almost nothing done.
Yeah.
They were actively working
tax
against
cuts,
it.
that's all.
Right. If we don't get a Senate leader that is going to really align with Trump, it's going to, no matter how many seat advantage you have, they're going to slow walk things.
Yeah.
And so it has to be from early on. Again, it's painful. It's sad that we have to have this happen for human beings. But at the same time, there's no way forward if we can't clear some of these issues out. And lastly, they have the numbers of how many real criminals. When Trump says that they opened their prisons and their insane asylums in other nations and sent them here, that is 100% true.
Yeah.
There's millions of active criminals here in the country. There are terrorists that have crossed the border, right? This isn't just about the little old granny that's been here for 30 years and came here, right? It's about the real dangers that exist by continuing to allow this and allowing them to be here.
Yeah, and you're harming the children coming. You're harming these people who are coming over, the ones who say they're not criminals by nature. They're not coming. You're putting these kids in these very vulnerable positions. You're actually responsible for the death of many children, many women in many cases, who are making this journey over here that's extremely dangerous, or being used by the drug mules or as drug mules, or by these cartels, or any of these different things. You are responsible for that if you don't stop this problem.
Real quick, under Biden too, hundreds of thousands of children went missing.
Yeah.
Well, where are those children?
Yeah.
Right? Where did they go? So there's some really horrendous things, bigger and far more severe than anything we could imagine.
Yeah.
And obviously anything we've been told. It's not just a straightforward thing of them coming here for a better life. There's so many other byproducts and things that are happening through that are just so bad for humanity at large.
And what is happening to these people, like you're describing, is far worse than any deportation process will be. So if you want to look at it as deportation being an uncomfortable and a sad outcome, you are actually, by doing that, saving countless kids, countless women, countless men as well from horrific destinies, horrific ends, and that alone in itself should be enough to do it. But I think that whether you're talking about immigration or any of these policies, Trump has so much on his plate, like I said. I don't think anything can be accomplished without a total remaking of our institutions, right? Our FBI, our Department of Education, our IRS, our FDA, our USDA, our Department of Agriculture. You go across them all. They all either need complete and total upheaval or to be abolished entirely. There's really no exception to that. You look at our military as well. Our military needs total reform. Trump's lasting legacy, I believe, more than any one policy, needs to be how he reforms those institutions and makes them into legitimate institutions, once again, that aren't actively attacking the American way of life. And that's going to be his biggest challenge, because they're all built against him, right? So he's going to need to go in guns a-blazing on day one. And I think his biggest mistakes in 2016 to 2020 were thinking that he could kind of just reform them a little bit, right? If I can reform them a little bit, I can make them like me, I can work with them. They're gone. They're totally lost, right? They are going to work against you at every step. And I think if he's learned that lesson, they're going to abolish a number of these government agencies, and our life will get better as a result.
Well, we're going to know very early on, based on his cabinet picks, what we can expect.
Yeah.
If he brings Mike Pompeo back, right, somebody who Tucker Carlson has said is a criminal, basically, that now you take that for what it's worth, whether you like Tucker or not, but there's a lot of people who believe that if he fills his cabinet with those kinds of people, it's going to be really hard, because Pompeo was the one who told him, don't declassify JFK. He was the one that wanted to target American citizens to drone strike them, right? There's those kind of things where, if we want change, those are the kind of things that we're going to have a good idea early on. The things that I'm most excited about, I think, and will be good indicators, and what will really continue to sway American opinion is if you start to declassify these things and you start to show what these organizations, the CIA and the FBI, and what they've been hiding, right, for years. When you all these kind of things, you're going to see, wow, it's bigger again than we could imagine. But I would say, lastly, the thing that I'm most excited about, and I really hope that this comes to fruition, is what he's brought RFK on to do, particularly with food, with those kind of things. I can't wait to see how fast they get the fluoride out of our city water. These dyes, when you talk about yellow dye, which was made from coal tar, all these kind of things. And when, the cigarette companies bought food companies when they found that cigarettes weren't going to be as popular anymore and started making all these things addictive. There's this app on if you get it's called Yuka or Yucca, YUKA. And we go around the store. We went around our house, and about a year or two ago, and we're scanning things. We're just so shocked. We knew the realities of how many poisons were in our foods, but to see it, every single thing. And so, if we can eliminate so much of that to make people more healthy, you're going to get less of the anxiety and depression and some of the issues that we're dealing with. You're going to have less of the chronic pain where we need all these
Your
medications.
Healthcare costs are going to drop as a nation. Right? And I was at Aldi recently, and I was going to just grab a little vanilla ice cream, and the ingredients were this long. There was soybean oil, vegetable oil, corn syrup. It was basically just a gallon of sludge. And you start to, once you get into that rabbit hole like I have I look for seed oils and everything, I look for dyes and everything, you start turning everything around. You're like, we are being poisoned. And it's hard not to feel like it's intentional because it is so many of these things are illegal in so many countries. So you're 100% right that alone, and I think that galvanized a lot of voters too, because no presidential candidate had ever talked about it before. Our whole lives we've just heard about how do we make healthcare more affordable? How do we make healthcare more affordable? It's never been how do you stay out of the hospital? Right? Why are so many people getting sick? How do we just become a healthier, stronger nation? That's a conversation that drew a lot of people in, I think, who may not have been that political, that they're like, this is the only time in my life I've heard somebody talk about this, and I need to see changes, because we shouldn't have to go to the store and examine every single ingredient on every single package to make sure that we are not just putting the worst crap in our bodies. And that's what we have to do for our kids and for ourselves. And it's just unconscionable that that's been allowed to happen. But you obviously understand why, with the links between the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry and all these things. It's a scheme in order to make us, a healthy patient is not a lucrative patient, right? A lucrative person is not going to be a patient. So I think that's huge. But lastly, kind of as we close all of this out, what I want to get into of what's next for Trump, what's next for America, what he needs to do. And I think it's something that he's already doing. I've talked about on this show before about how Trump, he'll be measured not just in policy or things that are passed or things that are, tangibly done. His legacy is going to be measured, I think, in how he restores pride in our nation, right? How he inspires people to go back to that American way of life, of our traditional culture of we're a prideful people, we're a strong people, we are a people that has unlimited potential. We strive for great things. We are capable of things that other people in other nations aren't, right? There is something special about us. There's something special about our country. We honor our heroes. We honor our history. We uplift people regardless of their background or anything else, their ethnic background, their racial background. We lift up people who are virtuous, who are good, who exude strength and courage in their endeavors, people like Elon Musk and those type of people that he's brought around him. I think that he has the opportunity to make that a long-lasting legacy of him as a person, because that's who he is, right? He's a person that, if you look at him, he's a person that so many people aspired to be, right? He is a product of that idea of American greatness, right? His whole life, his whole family is a product of those things. So I think he has the ability, unique to him more than anybody else because of who he is, to inspire that in people of I don't have to accept my lot in life. I don't have to accept that my country is sinking into depression, into despair. I don't have to into poverty. I don't have to accept that what's been handed to me. And I think that in itself can set our nation on a trajectory where we're not just talking every 4 years about saving this country, but we're talking about making America even greater than it's been before.
Yeah, one of the unique things that I doubt has ever happened in American history is that Trump surrounded himself with a super team of people that were going to go tackle multiple issues across, where it wasn't just about one person. And so many, I think, people voted because they saw this is a team effort of people coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, Democrats joining in, lifelong Democrats, a Kennedy, for God's sake, joining in, because they're all working towards what government was always supposed to be, which was, how do we find solutions for our people? How do we make the quality of life the best it can possibly be, right? We may disagree sometimes on the pathways of there, but there's some very clear ways to go about that. And so, again, the hope and the prayer is that all these people that were brought into the fold, including Donald Trump, that they're really going to, all the things that they've said, and I think that the shot off his ear really changed things for him, even more so than they already were, where I think he recognizes the opportunity. And I don't often put my hopes in people in politics because I've been burned too many times, but I really do believe that, there's two sides to it. One, I believe that they're going to execute at a very high level, but I also know that if they don't, this may be kind of the end, because people will, if they're burned by him and by this setup and this opportunity, that they may never trust another person with that chance again.
Yeah, this is. I talked about in the opening of God giving America another chance, and that's what this feels like in many ways. Is God giving our nation one more chance? Maybe this is the last chance to really get it right. And the great news is we're in the position for that to happen. Things have lined up. Things have happened where we can. This is the fork in the road of where we're going to go, but we actually have the opportunity to choose. We have the opportunity to make that direction. And that's, I think, where Trump's legacy is truly going to lie, of where do we go from here. So, Jonathan, thank you for being here. I'm sure I'll talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, I'll probably see you tomorrow.
yeah, come over for some wings, and get on the smoker and everything. But, this is an opportunity for America to make some great things happen, and I'm excited. You're excited. There's a lot of people that are excited. But now it's time for our uncomfortable truth. For today's uncomfortable truth, I'm going to make a statement, very loud and very clear. You're hearing right now that Donald Trump has won the election in a landslide, you're hearing the calls from a lot of Democrats and a lot of those on the left for unity, for peace. I want to speak on behalf of myself, on behalf of the conservative movement, on behalf of Republicans and Trump supporters when I say we reject your calls for peace and unity. For 4 years, and for much more than 4 years, you called us Nazis. You called us garbage. You called us deplorable. You tried to close our businesses. You tried to get us canceled. You tried to get us fired from our jobs. You tried to infiltrate and hurt our churches. You tried to indoctrinate our children. You tried to steal the innocence of our children. You tried to upend our way of life. You tried to flood our nation with foreign nationals and replace us as an American society. I will not accept your calls for peace and unity, because I know the moment when I turn around, there's going to be a knife in my back. We all saw what happened in 2016. And the truth that I'm sharing with you today is there is no uniting with a people that hate you. There is no uniting with a people that want to destroy your very way of life. There is no uniting with a people that will stab you in the back any chance that they get. We're going to have to be strong over these next 4 years. If you're like me, you want peace, you want unity, you want to come together with as many people as possible, but don't be foolish. Don't misunderstand what peace and unity means. Peace and unity from the left means that they're biding their time. They're waiting for their opportunity to undermine you at every step of the way. So if you want to make America great again, if you want to put America first, it's not having peace and unity with people who want to put America last. And so my call to you, my statement to you, my truth to you is that everything that's going to be accomplished by Donald Trump, anything that's going to be accomplished by the new Republican administration is going to be done because you stand firm in your principle, in your belief, and your unwavering commitment to an America First agenda. That's it for Man in the Arena. See you next time.
If I can change, я думаю, что каждый тоже изменился. And you can change. Вы можете измениться. Everybody can change.